the cloud. Okay, so this is a video for how to set up the VDEV rig and make your own. Make your own HDRI. So I'm using an existing VDEV rig that's found in resources. VDEV, I'm in the wrong folder. Let me go back out to shared drives, and I'm just going to find underneath some registry course, resources, lookdev, and then VDEV rig files. And I'm downloading this one right here. It has all the files I need. It's actually my project. So if you're doing it on your laptop, you can just download this and set the project to this one, but we're going to be transferring files onto the farm. This is an older version that's zipped up. You don't really need to zip it because when you download it from Google Drive, it'll zip it for you. I went ahead and downloaded that. I also downloaded some HDRIs. You can grab them online. You guys feel free. Cancel. What I do is I always browse websites and collect HDRI. It's fun for some reason. So I created a project. I'm just going to navigate to that lookdev VDEV, and I'm making it. I mean, you guys should make it as a separate file that you import into other files, and then you unreference it later when you're done with it. That's one way of doing it. So I usually create it as like a separate asset within my file. I just call this one VDEV. I would call it VDEV rig if I was you. I'm going to do, before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and open this. So I'm going to open this in the Finder. This computer's way faster. I like it. And then I'm going to, okay. So in here is VDEV .proj, right? When I make that asset, right? The way to make the asset work with run-maya inside of the pipeline is the name of this file and the name of this project folder needs to match the asset. Actually, I think you might not even need the folder to be matching, but these two need to be matching at least. So I download that folder. Inside that folder, I have under scenes, my Maya file. And under source images, I have some assets I'm going to use. So I'm going to go ahead and drag my Maya file in here. I'm going to delete this old Maya file. So I'll go ahead and move to trash. Yep. And I'm going to rename this one. So I'm going to come in here, rename it, and just set it to the name of that .proj folder, vdev.ma. And under the .proj folder, under source images, I'm just going to make sure I copy over those source images that I have here. I already copied them over, but I would want to make sure that they're all in there. Because what we need is this color checker chart. It's also called the Macbeth chart, and Dave calls it a chip chart. So it depends on, I've heard it called a kill card too. But essentially, this is just for color calibration. And their primary purpose is to make sure the colors look generally okay, but really we're going to be using it for matching the lighting and exposure level. I made this a light alpha, and that's just so that so I can have a soft edge to my key light when I bake it in, but we'll talk about that later. You guys don't have to do that. And then panorama HDR, this is just a starting HDR. You guys can use any HDR you want.
So you put that inside of the source of images?
Yeah, I mean, you could put them anywhere, but I like to store them in the source images folder if I'm going to be using it, wherever you're storing your project. So I'm going to go ahead and run my file. So run, let me just make sure I'm ls. Okay, I'm in the right file, run-maya vdev.ma. Okay, I'll also share with you guys the video where I learned how to do the spherical camera stuff. So there might be a step that I have to like Google really quickly because I'm like, oh, I don't remember that is. The one that is a gotcha or a trip up is when you store your HDRI as an image, you're not going to store it as JPEG or PNG because it's not going to have enough pixel values, right? We're using our pixel values as a light source, so we can't use our normal 0 to 255 JPEG, PNG light values because that's not enough range to represent like the difference between the sun and a white piece of paper. Example I was giving to somebody earlier was that, when you look at a picture, oh yeah, so here's the problems. It doesn't hurt anything, it's just really obnoxious. It pops up those missing ICO configurations. If you look at a picture of the sky and a piece of paper, and let's say the sun's in there, right? A normal camera is going to clamp so that when you look at the sun, you look at that piece of paper, they're going to look exactly the same value, right? They're going to both be white. And so the reason why that's a bad thing in like a JPEG or a PNG is because the JPEG and PNG can only store a certain amount of pixel values, right? And it clamps at 0 to 55. So we want to keep our we want to change our pixel values with our HDRI, right? So here I have my dome light, right? Which is just a map attached to a light source, and it turns the pixels into light sources, right? The sun, if I do like a high dynamic range capture, right? The sun is going to have like a magnitude of like 1,000 or 10,000, whereas my piece of paper might have like 100, right? So there's like a huge difference. So we need a higher dynamic range to capture all those values. So JPEG and PNG is too small. So we're going to be using a really large file format. We're going to be using OpenEXR float, 32-bit. And so it's like a really big file format, but we need that to capture all the value ranges. Okay, so here's my setup. I'm going to do a 2-panel view and just switch this one to my render. Show you guys what this looks like. Before I do anything else, I need to make sure that, well, we can just start a render and make sure this is actually working on this computer. So let's go ahead and render it. I'm going to probably get a image tool failed. Oh, hey, it didn't do it. Oh no.
Oh, sweet.
Oh no. Yeah, me too. Oh, what is going on with that though? Doesn't like me dragging. All right, so here's my setup. I've actually, the nice thing is, let me go ahead and I'm going to do this. I'm going to come in here and go to window. Window is on top. Okay, so that way the image tool doesn't go behind my. I'm going to come to attribute editor. The cool thing is that the Pixar dome light, which is where we're attaching our HDRI, actually has a saturation to it. So this map, if I just set that saturation of 1, right, would be colored, right? It'd have a lot of color information. But if they don't want it colored, you can still use a colored map, but just set the map saturation on your dome light to 0. So that's an easy way to do that without having to convert it in another program. Okay, so I need to reattach these, and so I probably need to come in here and I need to relink or refine those files. So you can see it's looking for, in this case, it's looking in the right location because it, when you run make asset on a computer on the pipeline, what it's going to do is it's going to set your project for you. If I go to my project window, right, it's going to tell me my project is under assets, lookdev, vdev, and then I have that .proj folder, right? And so it's set to that .proj folder, right? And that's that one that if I go in here and go upwards, right? Yep. So we have that .proj folder. So that's where our project's set. So we want to make sure that our files are, it could be within our project and be somewhere else, but it's better if it's in that .proj folder. But what I did was I dropped them into here underneath source images. Hey, can you guys not talk, please? Thank you. Or whisper. So I've dropped them in here, so I need to reference them in here. So I'm grabbing, oh, when we use that workspace, WS in brackets, there's a term for it, but wildcard, yep. It's representing our workspace, our project location. And then underneath that, it's looking for source images, color checker, RGB, sRGB text. So the reason why it's not loading is actually because I renamed that. So that's my bad. So I'm going to go here, workspace group, go to source images, go to, and I'm going to show all any type. And I want to grab that color checker.png, click open. And there we go. Now it's showing them. So as Dave mentioned in my VDEV rig files, if you're ever using a version of mine, you're always going to have this, but from frame 120 to 240, I have animation. So from 0 to 120, it rotates the objects, whatever's inside the, and I'll show you guys where that's at. And then between 120 and 240, it rotates the light source, right? So what Dave was saying was, you can see that like what you want your first frame to be, and what your default position of your light source to be is to be like your primary view. And some people miss that on like their turntables is they'll be like looking straight down their object or looking straight sideways. It's a good idea to pose your object and pose your light source so that the static shot, like the first shot or the first image, is the most appealing and the most attractive. So I make sure my primary light source, in this case, the sun, whatever it is a little offset from to the left, right? It's not directly behind the camera. I can come in here and I could maybe rotate it a little bit more. So like right there, it's a little bit more dynamic, but, and then also make sure my object is kind of turned in an appealing way. And then I go ahead and rotate it. But on this frame, this first frame, what Dave is saying that is that for a well-lit VDEV rig, you want to make sure that the emissive card, so I'm going to rotate that again. So the smaller card is going to be the emissive one. This is one that, what it means is it's the color in its pure form. There's no lighting or shadow information. You want in your like first shot or your primary lighting shot, you want the exposure between them, like the relative values, to be as close as you can get. They don't have to be the same. As you can tell, there might be some things like I think this one's going to be lighter than this one. This one's a little bit darker, but you want it to be pretty dang close. Okay. So that's what that kill card's there for our purposes. And it's also for color checking if there's like weird colors or color space on my monitor going on. All right. So I've got all that loaded. And so I'm going to cover, let me think really quickly. So let me show you guys the outliner really quickly, just to kind of show you guys the setup. And then I'll get into like how to capture it. We can capture it in this file too, or you can create a new file if you want to. So I have it here, this modeling group. Anything I put in the animation folder is going to be the thing that's going to spin. It's this animation folder is actually the thing that's rotating. You can see it has keyframes. So if you want to put anything to spin, I also have I have the key plot and the meat map model in here. You can delete those if you want to. Here's my backdrop mesh. And then underneath the rendering group, there is our environment light. You can see I have another environment light in here because I like to load it in. I'll delete that one. And then underneath the camera, actually parented underneath the camera, the diagnostic spheres. And the reason for doing that is that if I need to like move my camera out and like, because I have like a bigger object or I have to change the formatting or something like that, the diagnostic spheres are going to match it. What Dave and Megan were saying was, or Dave, I think Dave was mentioning of like the order of those spheres, like going left to right or up to down. Ask them, see what they like or what they prefer. But there might be like a way that you guys, like I've seen people do it just like vertically right here. I personally don't like it doing horizontally just because I feel like it starts to cramp in the model, right? And you kind of lose some space. So I think doing it right here is kind of nice. And that's also why I put the kill card right here and not over to the left of that. Anyways, if you need to replace the environment light, you would just come over here to there, go to attribute editor and just bring in a new HDRI. We're going to work with this HDRI. Actually, I'm going to work with a different one. So the problem with this one is that it has a key light in it. And so what Dave was mentioning was that, this is a really hard light because it's this really small distant light source, the sun. So the sun is so distant. It's essentially, that's what a distant light is based off of, is the sun, because it's so far away that the shadows and the light rays are essentially parallel with each other, which makes really crisp, hard shadows. If you have a light source that's larger, right, or a light source that's closer, you get softer shadows. And that's kind of what they're going for, is they want something that's a little less hard and a little softer, right? And so you can see right here, we get this hard edge shadow, and that's not very appealing. It's very well evenly lit though. So I have a couple versions. I'm going to open it here and go to that downloads folder. So in here I have a panorama sun gone. So that's where I remove the sun. This is panorama. It has everything else but not the sun. There's one where I darken the sun. There's another one where I darken the sky. And then I have a bunch of these other ones. And so if you look at the example renders folder, which would be in that drive, which I'll transfer after this video, right? I have visual previews of what those look like. So you're kind of you're trying to remove, or you either want to remove or you want to find an environment light where you're removing that really heavy hit, that hot intense hit from a key light source like the sun. It doesn't have to be the sun. Sometimes it's like a studio light or something like that. But I tried to find some examples of those. This one, maybe that kind of counts. And some of these might not be good candidates because, as Dave was saying, he doesn't want it to be busy, right? He doesn't want, that's what he looks for, is he looks for it to not be busy. Oh, and here's something, you guys see that little gradient on top of this? That was actually a problem with the old Macbeth chart that we had, is that it had a weird gradient on it. And so the new one we got is just like pure values. So if you have an old one and you're thinking of reusing it, just keep that in mind. You might just want to grab a new one.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For getting rid of the sun, does that just mean to clamp the values down?
You could do the clamping. That's what Dave mentioned. What I've done is I opened it in Photoshop as an EXR file, and then I dropped on like I think I copy pasted on top of it like the sky and just removed the sun. Okay. And then I think another thing I did was I dropped on a gradient with like opacity on it so that it just like kind of dropped the values. And so it, like, if you covered the sun with a pixel value of 40 or 30 or 20 or 10 or 255, it just went ahead and just like clamped it down. You could, but the nuke thing is also good. I will have to look into it because I've never done that in nuke before. But you can see all these. I've tried to choose ones where I'm removing the key light and trying to make sure it's not the sun. And it's that gray ball that Dave was mentioning, of making sure that the lighting shaping on this is like simple. With the reflections, it's a little hard sometimes to make that simple, right? Without having like a really boring environment light. But there is like a kind of like a fine line. So anyways, what I'm gonna do here is I'm probably gonna I'll try loading in that, and I'm gonna do this from the downloads folder, which is bad practice. So we'll do downloads, HDRI, because I don't want to copy them all on. That's gonna be a pain in the butt. So I'm gonna set this file types to any. We're gonna go to panorama sun gone and click open. It's gonna convert. When it's converting, it's probably a good idea to just, stop your render. If you have really big textures, it usually goes faster if you just restart your render. In this case, it's pretty simple. So something I probably should have done before I did that was, what I like to do is I'm going to right click and say command snapshot no AOV. So that just essentially, if you're running IPR, it saves a snapshot. And I'm just going to really quickly come back into here and control Z that back and just grab my other environment light and just compare them. So in this case, I did remove the light source. So you can see all of the other values look the same in terms of the reflection. I mean, the image might be just a little bit darker, but you can see removing that sun completely removed, my primary light source. So this is just all the fill from the environment. I will state now, I mean, it looks right? If you look at that right there, that looks like the same energy. But there is a chance that when I saved it, I clamped or lost value. So it might not be the same as a panorama just with the sun removed. But you can kind of see that sun just clamped out right there. But for this purposes, I'm just going to go ahead and use this one. And let's go ahead and I will come back in there and I will do edit, redo, and then Command Shift Z, and I'll just do that. Okay, there we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is, and for this kind of stuff, I'm just going to hide that backdrop mesh. So I'm just going to hide it. Oh, I always forget that on Max. Control H. All right. I'm going to just hide the environment for now. If you want, like something I was doing while I was working on this was I was actually, like I saved the version, I would duplicate this file or save a version of this file so you don't overwrite your original VDEV rig. So get your VDEV rig set up nicely, like, all the tweaks and settings and like arrangement stuff looks good. Got your kill cards, everything's loaded in good, and then just make a duplicate of it. And in that duplicate, that's where you're going to make your own HDRI. Because if I start goofing around in here, I'm going to get a bunch of extra gross stuff. So I'm actually going to save, increment and save. This is not really working on the pipeline, but I think I've mentioned it for anybody sat in on the the pipeline lecture, set that to ASCII. Is this doesn't quite work, but I'm just doing this so I can come back. So 0, 1, save, continue. All right, continue. It's thinking about it. Okay, there it goes. All right. Oh, okay, there it goes. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to leave that alone for now. So I actually kind of liked doing this with my, what I did was actually hid the model, and I just went here, Control H, and then I actually grabbed the diagnostic group or diagnostic spheres. So I'm just going to grab these guys. I'm going to put them in a group, Control G, just so that they have a common pivot point. I'm going to press D to manipulate my pivot point, and I'm going to right click and hold and reset my pivot point so it's in the middle, and then press D to unpivot. You guys can do it however you want. I'm just going to make this so that it's like in the middle, and I'm going to, I accidentally pressed render, my bad. And I'm going to scale this up into the middle, and I'm rendering it from the wrong camera, coming here. And I'm just doing this so I can kind of get a sense of how that lighting's look. You could do it on that teapot, but it's probably good to do it on this. And you can send, before even you bake down your HDRI and convert it to HDRI, you can take renders of this and then send it to Megan and Dave and just say, hey guys, do this shading look good on these assets, right? You see that kill card is obviously like not, underexposed. So I got to get that key lighting. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drop in a light source where the sun used to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drop in a disk. So I'm going to do a rect light. So the reason why I'm doing a rect light is a disk light you can't actually attach a texture map to. And I'm going to do like a little weird trick. I don't know if it's a good idea or not. I'm not a lighter, but I just did it when I was experimenting. So I'm just going to grab that light source. We're going to move it behind. First thing I like to do with my light sources in Renderman is I come over to advanced and turn on normalize so that the scale of the light source does not change the intensity of the light source. Because by default, the scale of your lights, if you scale up your light source, it's going to emit more light, but I don't like doing that. Or I don't like it when it does that. So I'm just going to move this big, and I might go ahead and stop the render so it goes a little faster. And I'm just going to go ahead and move it out here. What I might do sometimes is I might go ahead and look through the camera or light source. So I'll do look through selected. It's a little janky, but you can see I can, look up and then aim at it. The other thing I can do is, let's go back to perspective, is I can take this light source and grab that group. So I'll go into diagnostic tools group, just control selecting them. I'm gonna go to the rigging tab and I'm gonna go to constrain, aim constrain. I'm gonna open the settings for that. And then I'm gonna set this to, we're not gonna turn on maintain offset. We're going to set this so that the aim vector, well, I might just experiment because I always forget which one is which. And I might have done it backwards. So I think I might have to grab the group, then the light source, click apply. So you can see it's rotating, so that went the wrong direction. So I want to aim along its Z axis, I think. So I want to set the Z axis to 1, click apply. So it's going backwards. So I'm going to control Z that. So now I'm going to set that to -1. And click apply. And so an aim constraint is just making it so that no matter where I put this light source, it's always going to point at that target, which is over there. So I can freely move this and it's always going to rotate. So it's pointing it back that way. So I might come back over here, restart that render, click IPR. And we're going to go ahead and crank this light source. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure it's turn on primary visibility. So you can see it's not visible in the reflections. I'm going to turn on primary visibility. Actually, primary visibility is in camera. Never mind. So yeah, it's not even showing. It shouldn't even show up in here anyways. It's probably just because I haven't turned up the exposure. So I'm going to bring that up to like 14, higher, 20. 20 is probably going to be too much. Yeah, there we go. Okay, now we're starting to see it. So you guys can actually see that light source in there. I might even hide the panorama or the HDRI for now. So I'm just going to hide that for now, just so I can see what that light looks like. So the reason why I was attaching it, you probably don't have to do this. Like, I don't think that Dave would necessarily recommend it. But what I did was I in hard reflections, I didn't like how hard it was looking. So what I did was I created like a gradient in Photoshop, and I just went in here, and that's this light alpha, and I should have made it even softer. Like, I just made it kind of soft. And it's going to be blue because it's going to show the Renderman converting. And it might be so hard to notice, but the edge should be a little bit softer and a little bit fuzzier. I could have exaggerated that more. I want this to be a little bit more from the side. Like, this is just personal. I like my lights to kind of have more of like a 3/4 dimensionality to them. I like them to be a little bit up above the characters slightly. This is like kind of following like Rembrandt lighting, sort of, like getting it hitting like the front left or front right side. So you get like a nice light side, nice shadow side. And let's go ahead and bring back that panorama light for the environment. So if I come back over here, I want to look at this and see, are these values looking good? They are looking good. I think they're actually looking pretty similar. If anything, I feel like the environment light might be a little too bright for me. Might be good for them, but or they might prefer it brighter. But I almost feel like I would want like a little bit more contrast. So I might bring this back like -0.2 or something like that, just so I get a little bit more of a noticeable shadow side. But that environment light is really useful for getting complex reflections in your metals and your high specular surfaces. So if you have glasses, you guys probably have noticed this before. Actually, notice it when I do it right here, right? Like these objects, they get shading, right? But anything that's metal is purely reflective. So it's reflecting your environment. So if your environment doesn't have anything in it, it's just black, empty void, your metals end up looking black. So if you're ever wondering why your metals look terrible in Renderman versus why they look good in Substance Painter, is it's usually because you don't have an environment you're reflecting. So that's one of the nice things about an environment light, besides adding a lot of complex like shading to it, subtle shading to it. So the only other thing I would do here is I would do what Megan was mentioning, or both Dave and Megan were mentioning, which was adding in like that side sculpting light. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that over here. Again, I might grab that group, and I grab that light source and do constraint, aim constraint, just to point that light source at it. Where'd the light source go? There's the light source, light source. I'm going to come in here and just do the same settings where I'll turn on primary visibility. We're going to need it later, but I'll talk about it when we get to it. And then I'm just going to scale that light source up, and we're just going to increase the exposure a bit. So I'm going to be looking for it like right here. Oh, you can kind of see it right there. So let's just set that to like 12. Right, so now we're actually seeing it, and I might scale that light source up. So this is, let me go ahead and hide the other light sources. I just want to show this as an example. I'll hide the other light sources, and I'll give this as an example. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as a snapshot. So I'll come in here, right click, command, snapshot, no AOVs, right? So this is a pretty large light source relative to my assets. If I scale this down to a small asset or light source, let's scale it even more. Oh, too far. Oh no. There we go. Yeah. All right. So if I compare these, actually, I might have to make that even smaller because it's still pretty small. So I'm going to set this like 0.2. That's tiny, right? And it's still pretty big. Why is that still so big? And then I'm just going to move it far away. How about we just do that? And then I went in this case, because I'm moving it far away because of light fall off, I'm going to have to increase the exposure. This is not a great example, but like this is still not a good example. But theoretically, theoretically, this is actually what happens is when a light source is small relative to the surface it's shading, whether that means it's far away or light source is small, you get harder shadows, right? And let's go ahead, I'm just going to come here and do command snapshot no AOVs. I'm going to come back in here and control Z that back and just get it back up. I'm going to make this exaggerated, like much larger, and maybe set that just like a slightly more higher exposure. Right, so you can see the difference between those shadows right there, right? This is probably not the best example, but like that's a lot softer. And the relative brightness between these is pretty similar, but the difference is that relative to that source, you can see how it is relative to this surface, is it's much larger, which means that your shadows get a lot softer. So just keep that in mind. All right, so maybe I'll just go with something like this. All right, so I'm gonna bring all those lights back. With that side light sculpting my character, I might pull it a little bit more to the side. And then what I might also do is, because I've added that, I'm going to double check this, make sure this is good, still good. I might still drop the exposure on the environment light a little bit because those balls to me are looking a little too evenly lit. Like I wanted a little bit of a shadow on them. So maybe that side light is maybe a little too bright, right? You can see how even this is kind of looking, but I'm not going to fiddle with it too much. All right, so let's say this is the lighting setup we like. For the purposes of, I'm actually going to turn on the map saturation for making my HDRI light because I, might as well have the option, right? If you want to bring color back. And, I might want to set my light sources to have color. But anyways, so I have my environment light with no key light in it. I added the sun back in with a local light source so I can make it bigger. And that's the whole reason why we added it in, was because I can make that light source bigger so I can get softer shading on my objects. Does that make sense? Is anybody confused by why we replaced this one?
It also just makes the setup easier because you don't have to like scale it to the object for the like physical area lights.
I don't know what you mean, but
maybe I misunderstood what you started with.
Yeah, I'll mention that in a second. But does anybody understand why any questions about why we replaced this one? Anybody have any questions about size of light sources relative to shadow quality? Does that make sense? Does everybody understand that? If I quizzed you guys, would you be able to answer? Yeah? Okay. I'm not going to do it. I thought that would have been triggering somebody to be like, oh, wait, I don't know. All right. So once we do that, what we're going to do is we're going to actually render out all the lights, none of the diagnostic stuff, with a 360 camera. So what we're going to do is what I was doing was I'm going to go ahead and hide this stuff. So I'm just going to hide the rendering group. So I'll just do Control H. Oh, no, sorry, not the rendering group. I'm going to hide the diagnostic tools, which is just those guys. What I'm going to do is now going to go ahead and add in a new light source. So actually, let's bring that back really quickly because I'm going to compare. So I'm going to bring that back. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop my render. The reason why I do that is because I want to use this as reference later on. So I'm going to stop my render. I'm going to go ahead and hide the diagnostic group, right, which has like my killed cards and the diagnostic spheres. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep all my lights visible, of course, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new camera. So I'm going to go create camera, and I'm just going to leave it straight in the middle of the scene. And now what we need to do is we need to convert our camera, or we're not converting our camera, actually changing how like its field of view and how it maps what it renders to an image. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of come over here to, I believe it's camera shape. You scroll down and we're going to look for projection, camera projection plugin. So you go to Renderman, camera projection plugin, click on enable camera projection. And under here, you're going to get this new tab where we're going to attach a Renderman node. And so we're going to click on, oh, not that, break connection. So I'm going to click on this right here, right click. And I'm going to do Pixar sphere camera. So it's going to turn it to like a spherical camera. Okay, that stuff you don't have to mess around with. It should be good by default. It should do like a full 360 sphere. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and change my render output. If I knew how to do it with the Mel script, I'm sure there's an easy way to like going back and forth, but I'm gonna do it manually. So mine's set to HD 540 right now, which is this small format. I need to change this to essentially a square. So I think like a 2K square is probably enough. Like that's probably plenty. And then once I've done that, now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come to this camera. So I'm gonna go ahead and look through that camera now. So I'm gonna go to, and I'm gonna go ahead and name it so I don't get confused. So this one's I'm gonna call this one sphere cam. So I don't accidentally render from the wrong one. So we're gonna go to perspective sphere cam, and then I'm gonna go ahead and render from it. And so we'll click on render. And so what it should do is you can see one of my objects is showing up. So what I need to do is I need to make sure my my primary visibility is turned on them. So I'm going to turn on primary visibility on that guy, and I'm going to make sure that key light, I think this is key light. I should name my lights. Let's call that key light. I think that's it. I'm going to also make sure this one has primary visibility turned on. And now I'm going to go ahead and move that camera back. If you ever want to do Control Z and Control Y for cameras, like if you move your camera, like, oh, didn't want to move it, you can press the bracket keys on your keyboard. It's like undo and redo your camera move. So I'm gonna come back over here and I'm gonna click on render. It should be pretty fast. And now you can see I have all of my lights. So my two light sources are showing up in there and my environment lights showing up as well. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that, I want to stop that really quick. I'm gonna come over to Renderman. This is going to be the one thing I know I'm going to forget where it is. And we're going to come over to, I think it might be the features tab. I'm trying to remember where it's at. Oh, before we do anything else, what we also need to make sure we're doing is we're going to come here to pixel readout. So I'm going to turn on Windows pixel readout, and we're going to make sure we're rendering from ACES CG. So keep that in mind. I'm doing ACES. The file should be defaulted to ACES, but if it's not, just keep that in mind. Dave and Megan want us to be doing ACES. If you're doing ACES, make sure you're doing ACES CG. Make sure you're not doing ACES 2065. You'll notice like the colors are super saturated. That is like the archive color space. We want to use ACES CG color space, okay? And you want to make sure it's not set to utility linear sRGB, or you can see how desaturated that is. Or if you're actually, you don't have ACES set up, it should default to linear sRGB. So if you look in here, or you can find that underneath view image color space, if it's set to like linear, and the display view is set to sRGB, then it's a problem. The display view should be sRGB, or you could do Rec 79, but the image color space should be ACES CG. Okay.
And you said that the pipeline here should be by
Yeah, and so the only thing is if you download my file, it should have ACES already configured. But if you're making it by scratch, you might have to come into configuration. By default, it'll be off. You want to set to ACES 1.2 to enable that, and then you have to switch your color space. Okay. The one thing I'm looking for is where the float value is. So I know it's in here somewhere. And it's essentially a way to, oh, I know where it is. It's in the AOVs. So I come into beauty. So what you're gonna do is you go into your AOVs, which is essentially like, these are your images you're rendering out. And so later on, when we talk about compositing and render passes, if you haven't done this before, it's essentially making multiple images for compositing. But the default beauty is what we're seeing in the viewport. And so what we wanna do is we wanna make sure that it's set to OpenEX bar. It should be by default. And we wanna change that type from half to float. So this is going to have more storage space. And so that's just going to make our image have a lot more, a much wider value range. And I'm going to have to probably close this. I don't know. I can't remember, but I definitely have to re-render. So I'm going to stop that or close that. And no, I don't care. Discard. Oh, wait, actually, you know, before I do that, what I do want to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to file, export this file right here as a JPEG. I'm going to call this one ref_true. So this is really important that you guys do this. Just make sure you got all your settings set up right. I'm going to put this on the downloads folder. I'm going to say ref true. And then I'm going to go ahead and come back over here and I'm going to close this window. Just don't save. And then I'm going to come back in here and render that again. So I'll render. All right. And so then once it's done rendering, and it shouldn't take very long, if anything, the thing that takes a while to maybe clean up might be the light source itself. The environment light should be like pretty much pure. And then what you do there is, after you've done that, you want to keep this window open. We're going to go to File, Export File, we're going to change that to open EXR float, no AOVs. Don't do open EXR float EX with that one because it's going to have like the alpha channel in there. It can mess things up. We're going to do open EXR. Oh, sorry. I just said don't do that one. Do float, no EXR. I'm going to call this one, I don't know, something stupid, custom HDRI. Say save. So something that can be a problem is the color space, and we might run into that in a second. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come back into my render settings. I'm gonna set my render settings back to HD 540. So HD 540, that's just what I had before. I'm gonna go back to looking through perspective. We're gonna look back through render cam. And then I'm gonna go bring back my diagnostic objects. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring that diagnostic group back. And then I'm going to go ahead and hide the light sources. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the light sources all out. Let's pull that one out of that group. And I might grab all this. I'm going to put it in a new group, and I'm going to call that render lights. So I'll call it render lights. Reason why I'm doing that is because I don't want the lights anymore. I want, or if I'm testing this, I don't want the lights to test. I want to load in my HDRI that I just made and check and see how close it is to my scene. So what I'm going to do is we'll just minimize that for now. I'm going to go ahead and drop in a new dome light, and I'm going to find where I put that file. So I'm going to go ahead and in my case, I put downloads. Don't put it in the downloads folder. I just did it because I'm trying to do this a little bit faster. You can see it looks a little weird at first, but it should convert okay. And sometimes it doesn't preview it, and that's just a matter of how it was created. But what I want to do is I want to open that texture manager up, and we're going to parse the scene. You can see it's going to start converting it, and you want to make sure it's reading it as an environment map and it's reading it as an sRGB linear. Okay, it's going to take a second, probably because it's like a 2K image. And then I'm going to go here, and I'm going to come back in here, and this one I turn off primary visibility again, just because my other render had it like that. I'm going to start IPR. Fingers crossed. Okay, so the light source looks like it's rotated, so I'm going to have to rotate it. So we'll come in here and we'll just rotate this so it's like the right orientation, but so far it seems promising. And so I'm going to go ahead and have that pulled up, and I'm going to go ahead and go to where I saved that image. So I'm going to come to, I think I saved a version of it to the image, so ref true here. And so I'm going to compare them to each other. And so before I do that and export it, you can see, hopefully there's like a bit of a color issue here. But that's probably because of how I exported the color map. And I might have to cover that later because we're getting close to the upload time for dailies. But you guys can probably see the saturation is a little bit different. Let me go back in here and I'll just save that out as an image. So we'll do export file. And I'm going to go ahead and set that to JPEG. And I'll call this one custom. And I'm going to go ahead and save that there. And I'm going to open both of those at the same time. So we're just going to grab custom and ref true, open. Is that how it works? Oh, how do I open them in like the same viewer? Do you guys know? Double on one image? Just double click one of them? Okay. Oh, perfect. So, right, I want to like kind of compare them. And so obviously like the color looks a little off and the lights will look a little off too, like the shading. But what I really want to look at, and what I could have done is I could have, if I rendered this out, if there's a way to, I don't know if inside here you can view with, what I might be able to do is I actually might be able to open it inside an image tool. So let's just open file, and we're just going to grab custom and ref true, open. And so that I need to set this back to, or set this to raw, just so it's not doing any color management because these are already color managed. So what I could do is I can come in here and I can go to image or view, and I can do channels, luminance, and then I can look at them. And you can see the values, like look at that kill card. They're like slightly different. And that's probably because my environment, the angle is slightly different. And also maybe the environment map, I might adjust the exposure, but they're pretty dang close. It's really, and I need to rotate that light source, right? Because they're slightly off, but the values should be pretty dang close. The main thing you're gonna notice, here's the true and here's the custom, is that your light shaping might be different. And the reason why that might happen is if your light source is close, like for instance, I put this side light like kind of close to these objects. But when you map it to an environment map or environment light, right? So it's attached to this environment. is, as Dave said in the lecture, those pixels on on that image are now treated as infinitely far or distant light sources. So they're really, really far away light sources, where that other actual light source in the scene was like essentially like right here. And so your light fall off on your objects is going to be different, right? The shaping should be similar, like the shadow, like how hard and how soft your shadows are. The colors are supposed to be the same, but fall off is different because that's a true property of a light source. Like if I held a candle, which is a really small and weak light source, and I held it here, like it's going to fall off really quickly to the point where I'm barely getting any light over here. But if I got this, like, imagine my fist, and imagine I was lighting it with a candle, right? Right? It wouldn't take a lot of energy. Let's say I had a light source that was all the way on the other building. I was trying to get the same amount of light on here. But the fall off, like if I held my hand right behind it, would almost be the same. Like the light value that's on this hand and this hand would almost be the same. But if I had that candle, the light value on this hand versus this hand would be drastically different, even though the local, that target looks the same. And that's because light has this inverse square fall off where, you know, it really, really quickly falls off, like from the light source, and then it gets essentially steady. So if you're lighting with a really distant light source, at that point, the fall off is super steady. So the difference of the light source from here to here is very negligible. It's like the sun, right? With the sun, if, you know, if the sun's like low on the horizon and I'm technically standing closer to the sun than you are, like let's say the sun is over there and Toby's right there and I'm right here, like compared to the sun, because of light fall off, it, like the difference between me and Toby is so negligible. And at that point, that fall off is like almost like steady, right? So that is something that will happen. So really quickly, I'm going to try to, this is the one thing I wish I had remembered to do before I'd done this, was double check how I fixed the color stuff. But I'm going to try to do that. You know what I might do is I'm going to pause the recording. Yes, cool. Awesome. Okay, so I just wanted to wrap up with that color space issue I had in the, previously, where I had these colors weren't looking right. And then this was the true render. And so here's my render. You can see those colors are, let me go ahead and hide that catalog just so I can put them next to each other. So you can see, here's what I had before. That desaturation was there, didn't look right. And here's the true render. And here's a recent render with the updated HDRI image that I created, the custom one. And then you can see those colors are true. And so you could thank Travis Hausman for reminding me of how to do this. But the main issue is, I'm going to come back in here. When I exported my texture map here, I was exporting an ACCG. And then when I was re-importing it, this image in as an environment light, when I opened up my texture manager, and here I had it set to reading it in as sRGB linear. So when I saved my file, I actually wasn't saving it in sRGB linear, I was saving it as ACCG. And so what's happening is it's taking that image that was rendered in ACCG and thinks it's supposed to be in sRGB linear and converts it. So it's essentially doing an unnecessary conversion when it's already ready for ACES. So if I rendered an ACES, then what I want to do is I want to set it to rendering. And when I set it to rendering, and it's already like that, you might have to click apply and then let it, and you might also have to click parse scene. But when you do that, what it does is you're essentially telling Renderman that, hey, this file is already converted properly. You don't have to convert it. And so then I get all the proper colors and all that stuff. So we're not getting into color spaces and color management workflow right now, but that's something you do have to keep in mind because we're working with ACES, which is a color space. ACCG is a color space. We're exporting our file in ACES, and then when we import it back in, we want to make sure that it's when we import it back in, we want to make sure that the texture manager understands that, hey, this custom HDRI that I made is already set to ACES, so don't convert it, because its default is to want to do sRGB linear. The other option is, of course, you could export this out instead of exporting it with ACCG. When you export it, you can switch it to something like utility linear sRGB. So if you did that, then it's going to let it know that, hey, set this to linear sRGB, and then this would be good, sRGB linear. And so when we re-imported it, it would make the conversion because it would need it. The reason why I would want to do that, though, is that, or over rendering it out as ACCG, is that this is more broadly applicable. Like if I wanted to use this environment light in other places, I wouldn't have to rely on using ACES, right? I could just let it be utility or linear sRGB. So I just wanted to point that out because that is something that might trip you guys up. So this should be everything. Hopefully that made sense. So I will stop recording.